On your Tuesday episode of Locked On Raptors, March Madness begins this week, and we take a look at the college prospects who might be around when the Toronto Raptors are picking at maybe 6th, maybe 16th, maybe 20th, maybe 32nd. We'll get into all that coming up with Matthew Winick from The Score, the wonderful college basketball writer over there, coming up on today's show. Thanks for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, March the 19th, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 10 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on the Hell website at Woodley Sean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors, and you can join us over in the Locked On Raptors Discord server, where right now you can get your entries in for the Locked On Raptors Listener League bracket for both the men's and women's March Madness tournaments. Come and hang out, join, and be part of our little bracket showdown going on in the Discord. Would love to see you in there. A great little community we got building around the show. Link in the description of the podcast. It's free to join as always. Of course, you can find the show for free wherever you get your podcast on the audio side of things. Follow, subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend, etc., etc. Always appreciated when you support the show. However you support the show, you can also go to YouTube and subscribe to the channel. And when you do that, hit the little notification bell. You get a heads up every single time the show premieres or goes live, so you never miss a second of that sweet, sweet Locked On Raptors action, baby. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs, who help you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And we get rolling here as March Madness draws near. I think the first 4 games kick off tonight, which is very exciting. And we will dig into all the prospects who could be potentially landing with your Toronto Raptors at some point in this draft, where we don't really know where the Raptors will be picking yet. We know they'll have picks. Will it be 2 picks? Will it be 3 picks? Will they trade all the picks? We'll see. But here to break down the college end of things when it comes to the prospects is Matthew Winick from The Score. They're wonderful college basketball writer over there who we go back to our days doing like CEBL Weekly at the little studio in Niagara. Matthew, it's lovely to see you, man. How are you doing? Thanks for being here.
Oh, yeah, thanks for having me. You know, I just realized in the background behind me, for those on video, I've got a OG Anunoby Raptors jersey and an Anthony Edwards Georgia Bulldogs jersey. So I feel like those were somehow the correct jerseys to have behind me. Completely not planned, but some Raptors and some college. I feel like that's a good blend for the episode today.
We love it. Also, fitting to have an Anthony Edwards jersey the day after he gave a guy a concussion from dunking so hard, which is scary for John Collins, but also, my God, unbelievable thing to have on your dunk resume, which is the most important resume one can have in the sport of basketball, I'd argue. So let's get into it. The Toronto Raptors, of course, the season is a lost cause. We are sort of running out the string here. And, far earlier than I ever have, I'm sort of tilting my eye now towards draft coverage and digging in this week with March Madness starting. Feels like the place to get into it. And we'll talk about the guys who are not in the college ranks, which is frankly most of the more exciting prospects in this draft, but there are plenty of guys playing for high-level college teams, sleeper college teams, who might find their way into the draft, whether it's as a second-round pick for the Toronto Raptors at the start of the second round with that Pistons pick, or in the middle of the first round with that Pacers pick, potentially as high, as number 1, potentially, if they get some lottery luck on lottery night on May the 12th. And so it's hard. It's amorphous. We don't really know where the Raptors will be picking, but that's the nice thing about this draft is there seems to be a wide range where a lot of these guys can fall. I'm kind of dubbing this the ifs and buts draft. If its and buts were candy and nuts, this would be the most delicious draft you've ever seen. However, it's, kind of loaded with guys who are full of caveats, full of major question marks, full of sort of one-dimensional skill sets where you're not quite sure if the second dimension is going to come in. And we're going to try to rattle through those guys here today. But Matthew, before we get into some specific names, we're going to talk about the UConn guys, Stephon Castle and Donovan Clingan. We'll talk about the Baylor guys, Jacobe Walter and Yves Missi, among others. Just your sort of broad feelings about this college crop of prospects. Are you with the sort of consensus that this is kind of a meh group of dudes?
I think as it currently stands, it's a med group of dudes, but I think there's a lot of projection that can be had. I mean, granted, that's every draft, but if we're going into the UConn guys, someone that I definitely think has some great projection moving forward is Stephon Castle. Keep in mind, he's on the best team in college basketball, right? That's not something you usually say for one of the best prospects in this draft. And I think that it's hard for NBA scouts or fans to really see what he could do in a larger role, because to be the fifth option on an NBA team or fourth option on an NBA team still requires a fair amount of, usage. In college, if you're the fifth guy in a 40-minute game where the court is shrunken, you're not doing much. And for Stephon Castle, he's become more efficient, more effective in finding ways. You can tell someone who's been a top prospect his entire life has been a top option on every team he's played on. He's found ways to be a great complementary piece, whether that's coming off of screens and driving to the lane for a couple dribbles and a pull-up, or his defensive skills have gotten better, his playmaking skills have gotten better. And to me, his biggest draw is his frame. He's 6'6", 215. He's got long arms. He's really bouncy. He's got a great burst off of the dribble. And I feel like he fits the mold of someone who may have not had the greatest college stats because of the system and because of his role, but can really explode, once he gets into the NBA and the space and the floor opens up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's we'll dig into Castle a little bit more. We'll dig into all these kinds of guys who are on the, in the tournament, various sort of roles and, again, situations. There's guys on great teams who, have that sort of difficulty of context to sort out. There are guys on sort of less good teams or sleeper teams who are the clear main show in town. And how does that translate to the NBA in a sort of, a lesser role than you would assume they're occupying for their sort of, their sort of mid-major teams and whatnot. We'll get into all of that. Do you have a favorite sort of team of prospects in this tournament, Matthew, to tune in for, especially from the Raptors perspective, right? You got the OG jersey there. You're clearly a Raptors guy. Is there a team that if you're just sort of a Raptors fan says, hey, Matthew, this is me asking you the question, what team should I be most focused in on when it comes to the draft prospects who could land with my team? Which team is that?
I think that you're probably going to want to look at Kentucky just because of the sheer number. There's just so many possibilities. Like of there's probably 9 guys, maybe 10 guys on their roster that will play in the NBA one day, 3 of which are probably lottery picks in this year's draft, and that's Reed Sheppard, Rob Dillingham, and Justin Edwards. Unless the Spurs pick, the pick that we might give to the Spurs does convey, and we get that top 6 selection, probably not getting Reed Sheppard, although that would be fantastic. Although you don't really expect it from a 6'2" guy with, not great measurables. He is one of the greatest guards I've ever seen in college in terms of his IQ and being cerebral and fitting the game and his defensive instincts. He's one of the best players I've ever seen in college at making the right play defensively, help defense, steals on double teams, whatever it might be. He's number 10th nationally in steal rate, and he does not have the length that some of these players that are in that on that list. Rob Dillingham is sort of someone with a much larger range, someone who might be there for that Pacers pick just because teams might be even more put off by his size than Reed Sheppard's because he's listed at 176 pounds. That's not, really lottery pick projection size. And he's at 6'3". His defense is not Reed Sheppard's. He can really get pushed around and lost, but with the ball in his hands, he's a maestro. He's one of the best on-ball scorers in college that I've seen come through the last couple of years. I hear a lot of Lou Williams comps, and I guess the question is, if you're picking a guy who's an absolute heater off of the bench who can average 20 in a season despite not starting, is that a lottery pick? And perhaps in this draft it is. You might have to look towards guys with, specific specialties to fill a role, even if they don't project as much more, just because, like you said, there's so many question marks.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way of summarizing sort of my rudimentary research into this year's draft, which is like it's not laden with potential stars. Sam Vecini had his new mock out this morning at The Athletic, and he sort of laid out like last year's draft, he had 5 guys he classified as tier 1 prospects. The year before, he had 4 guys he classified as tier 1 prospects, sort of like, okay, these guys can be like all NBA player type projections. This year, he says he doesn't even have anyone in tier 2 for him. And so you're looking at guys who are going to fill gaps, who are going to fill roles. The nice thing for this Raptors team is they have Scotty Barnes. We know he's going to be the dude. They have Emmanuel Quickly. They know he's going to be their lead guard of the future. And this is kind of a roster that is more in need of those connective pieces, those guys who fill those gaps in skill that can tie all the pieces they have already in-house together. This isn't your typical Washington Wizards-like rebuild where it's just like, oh God, please get us the most talented player. This isn't the 07 Raptors where it's like, just like, oh, we win the lottery and we get Andrea Bargnani, like, or the 06 Raptors. And it's like, oh, okay, like this is bad for our overall health going forward as a franchise. No, like the Raptors got their guy, and they might have more than just one guy to work with here going forward. And so this draft could offer some pretty interesting opportunities, whether it's at 6 or higher, whether it's in that Pacers pick range between like 16 and 20, whether it's in that Pistons pick range. We'll get into all of that. And I want to dive into the Yukon guys and the Baylor guys coming up in just one sec, as Jacobe Walter, Yves Missi, Stephon Castle, and Donovan Clingan are all particularly interesting potential fits with the Raptors. Maybe Clingan less than the other three, but we'll get to that coming up in just one second. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Stitch Fix. You know that confidence boost you get from an outfit that makes you look really good? Well, it's possible for you to get that with Stitch Fix without ever having to go to a store. That is pretty sweet. I hate shopping for clothes. I never do it. I bought stuff last week for the first time in like 6 months because I just don't like going to the mall to try stuff on. It's just not my favorite activity. I would rather be talking to you fine folks on a podcast, for example. But with Stitch Fix, you can easily upgrade your wardrobe this year with a professional stylist that helps you find new on-trend favorites that will work for you. All you got to do is give your stylist your size, style, and budget preferences, and you can order boxes when you want, how you want, no subscription required. They send you 5 just for me pieces, plus outfit recommendations and pro styling advice. You keep what works, you send back the rest. It's that simple. Stitch Fix makes it all so easy. You don't like to shop and you want to be like me and save time, then you can go and get yourself a Stitch Fix stylist to help you find the stuff you want to be wearing as the summer season draws near. Style that makes you feel as good as you look. Get started today at stitchfix.com/lockedon. That's stitchfix.com/lockedon. stitchfix.com/lockedon. Go check them out. All right, we continue on here with your first listen of the day. Thanks so much for hanging out as we dig into the college prospects to watch in March Madness. Of course, one of the challenging parts as well here is a lot of the top college prospects did not make the tournament with their respective teams. So we're kind of with an even more whittled down field to watch here. But that means we can get a little bit more specific with some of these guys and take some time to dig in. We talked a little about Stephon Castle in the first segment, and he's where I want to begin because I think if the Raptors are at number 6, if they hang on to that pick, if they jump up even to like 4 or something like that, I think Stephon Castle could be a potentially very interesting fit on this Raptors team. He plays for UConn right now. He's sort of a 1-2 hybrid type, 6'6", 6'7", nasty defender on both ends. The big issue with him has been three-point accuracy, although he's had a nice finish to the season for UConn. Does a lot of other stuff really well, has some shake to him. He's a pretty fun player to watch and seems just kind of like the type of maniac you want on your team to win basketball games. Matthew, I know you're a Stephon Castle guy. What's the sort of scouting report on him for Raptors fans who may be interested in tuning in for UConn's top guy?
Yeah, you said it. If he builds that 3-pointer up, I think the ceiling is really high. A guy that I like to throw around, and it's not a name I should be throwing around lightly, but he kind of reminds me of Donovan Mitchell in a way where he kind of has the 1-2 guard combo size. Mitchell, it's more with the wingspan than the height, but right. He has playmaking ability. He's not necessarily a primary point guard, but he can take over the team if point guard's on the bench. He does fit that 2-guard mold. He has great size. He's a great defender, athleticism, burst, speed, bounce. With Mitchell, the shot was in the mid-30s, I think 34% at Louisville with Rick Pitino. Castle is at 28% this year, but it's worth noting that it's 33% in conference play. In the non-conference schedule, which is basically November and December, he went 1 for 11. So it's getting better. He's becoming more comfortable. I think that with the way that NBA players are learning how to shoot, moving forward from college, there's no reason why he can't become at least an average 3-point shooter. And keep in mind, a lot of these shots are off of screens, off of curls, off of bounce. They're not completely wide open jump shot threes. But I did a study last year when I was looking towards last year's draft and sort of, because Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson, and the Thompson brothers were all below 30% at their respective levels before the NBA from three. But Henderson and Wembanyama had much better free throw numbers. And I did some research, and there's like the old adage that if you can shoot free throws, you can shoot threes. But it really is true. If you look into historical data about free throw shooters and Castles, it's 76% on the year, and he's gotten there 90 times. So it's not like he's a non-shooter. I do think that the three-pointer can come along, and that would make him, like a really good in-between fit with Quickly's point guard skills and Barnes, on the wing / his point forward ability.
Yeah, I think the idea of pairing him in the backcourt with Quickly, if you're assuming that Gary Trent Jr. is either moving on this summer or gets moved to more of a bench role to sort of help with the defense in the long term, obviously Grady Dick is going to have a claim to a starting job at some point down the line as well. But given the lack of wing defense this team has and the lack of size they have, I feel like going with a 6'7" dude at the 2 guard next to Quickly gives you some pretty good size to work with RJ Barrett, with Scotty Barnes filling in those 3 and 4s. Obviously, the 3-point shooting, if it's not there, it makes that fit with Barrett pretty untenable and the fit with Barnes pretty untenable, especially if your starting center is going to be Jakob Poeltl, who's a total non-shooter. We got to see if Barnes can bounce back next season and sort of recover his 3-point stroke from the first half of this year. We got to see if RJ Barrett, shooting 42% on mostly wide open catch and shoot looks, is going to hold up, as of course we've seen him oscillate as a 3-point shooter throughout his career. But if Castle, like you say, is an average 3-point shooter sometime down the line, that is a lineup that makes a lot of functional sense, and you kind of make back some of the size that you lose in the front court and on the wings by having Castle in the backcourt with Emmanuel Quickly. He is my favorite guy so far, and again, I'm very early on into my sort of always rudimentary research into this stuff, and I like to lean on people who are far smarter than I am to sort of build what I feel about these guys. But it's nice to hear that you're feeling pretty good about Castle as well. Probably not a guy who will be there at the Pacers pick. It seems like he's kind of on the up and up, and if UConn goes on a deep run, that will almost surely mean he's like a lottery pick at the very worst. He's been mocked anywhere between 1 and 15. I think Kevin O'Connor might have him number 1 in his most recent mock, or someone has him number 1. And so, there's, a wide range, but probably going to have to be a situation where the Raptors keep their pick to get Stephon Castle. If they do, it's not a sexy draft. It's not a great draft to be picking number 6, but that could be a nice consolation prize for the Raptors if that does happen. Donovan Clingan, 7'2", gigantic center, blocks a million shots, also plays for UConn. This sort of, again, there's ifs and buts with all these guys. I think I like Castle because the ifs and buts are the least extreme. With Clingan, it's can he play more than a half a game at the college level and stay on the floor? His minutes have ratcheted up down the stretch, but what's your read on Clingan? He's again 7'2" dude. Maybe not the most fleet of foot, but he's got some passing chops, he's got finishing chops, and he's got extreme rim protection chops. Where are you at with Clingan? What do you think of him if he were to be in the range for the Raptors with that Pacers pick, for example?
I mean, I'm not a huge fan. I think, though, my pause is I also was not a huge fan of Walker Kessler coming out of Auburn, and he proved to be the shot blocking definitely transferred over. But Walker Kessler was the best shot blocker in college basketball in America when he was taken late in the first round. Clingan, while an excellent shot blocker, is in the top 20, but he's not in the top 10 or number 1 like Kessler was. I don't really believe in his lateral quickness. I think that's what it comes down to. You can be a great shot blocker, and if you are not able to, if you play a drop coverage with him, he'll be fine. But his footwork isn't unbelievable. His foot speed is not great enough that you can do any other scheme with him. And I think that when we're talking about first-round picks, and I've even seen him in the lottery a couple of times, why are we still picking big men who can't move their feet well enough? And he's made 2 threes this season. He's made 2 threes his entire career, his 2 years at UConn. It doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. His touch is okay. We talked about, can you shoot based off of free throw projections? He's a 57% free throw shooter this year. And yeah, his passing skills are fine, but keep in mind, this is the most, fluent offense in the country. They've basically brought back their entire team. All the players on their team now are from their squad last year. Obviously, they lost Andre Jackson and Adama Sanogo and Jordan Hawkins, but they have a similar system. He's very comfortable in it. They drop him very heavily so that he doesn't have to deal with switching onto guards, and they kind of have this perfect little system for him to be super effective, and he has been super effective. But I don't see his style of play transferring over to the NBA in a way where he is worthy of a lottery pick, even in a lesser draft like this one is.
Yeah, I'm with you on Clingan. Also, like the way the Raptors are now set up, they've got Olynyk and Pirtle as their centers, presumably for next season. And that's not to say that that precludes them from going to draft a center. If they jump up in the draft and take Alex Sarr with the first or second pick, then fine. Like that's great. That's a prospect you can grow on. But I think they're not in the position where they just have to go say, oh, we got to get like a Christian Koloko replacement just as like a third rim protecting big. I think if they're going to take a swing on a big, it's got to be someone who could be the big of the future. And I don't see that with Clingan from what I've seen so far. A guy who on Baylor maybe profiles as the type of defensive, bouncy, switchable defender that might be worth swinging on is Yves Missi. He's really interesting to watch. He's kind of like, he sometimes looks like Bambi on offense, and then sometimes he throws down extremely loud lobs. Defensively, he seems to have all the chops in the world. And I do think the Raptors have to prioritize defense with this year's draft. They just need defenders. They need size on this team as well. And Yves Missi, who, seems to be the type of guy who could anchor a defense as a big man, he's pretty interesting. The offense, not there. He's not a three-point shooter. He's not a very good passer. His assist rate, I believe I was reading the no ceilings breakdown of Missi kind of in their college prospects preview, and it was like his passing and sort of assist rate is like shockingly low, which is not what you want, especially for a team that's running the offense they are, where the bigs are heavily involved as playmakers. But talk to me about Yves Missi. I'm pretty fascinated by the defensive upside of this dude.
Yeah, he has 13 assists on the season and 131 made field goals. So that's not, but they don't use him in that role. Like when I watch him play, I see a lot of draft year Clint Capella. Obviously, now Capella's in his 30s and he doesn't have the same bounce that he once had. But think, Rockets Capella with James Harden, just an elite roller, an elite rim protector, has the size and the speed to be able to hang with guards if he gets switched onto them, and there isn't a better rim runner in this draft. It's not even close. He is extremely twitchy off of the bounce, and you said Christian Koloko replacement. Obviously, it's easy to compare them both. They're both Cameroonian, but the big difference for me is Missi is fast. Like Missi has quick twitch movements. Koloko, while super long and able to finish lobs and to protect the rim, wasn't the same athlete vertically or sprinting speed that Yves Missi is, and I think that's really enticing. He's the type of defender that you don't really need to become a great shooter, and you see a lot of these guys in the NBA thriving, whether it's as Hartenstein or Mitchell Robinson at the Knicks or Capella, like we mentioned. The one question is, does he fit with Coach Darko Rajakovic's system? Because he's not going to be able to, I don't see anytime soon, be able to stand at that high post and make passes over the defense to players cutting or players getting open for three. Like we said, 13 assists on the season. So if Darko's system can fit a rim runner, there isn't a better one than Missi. But if your whole system is, we want Kelly Olynyk, we want Jakob Poeltl running high post passing action, then you're not picking him because he can't run that system.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how flexible they are with the types of guys that they have, and also like how much they feel like they can develop a guy to sort of morph into the system to take advantage of his ample defensive gifts. I think as much as Poeltl and Olynyk offer a lot, and Poeltl in particular is a rim protector in sort of traditional drop coverage, having someone who could just be a straight switch defender for you at the 5 would be pretty damn cool as an extra tool in the toolkit. Fascinated to see what Yves Missi does for Baylor. The other guy on Baylor that I think I'm less in on for the Raptors, potentially with that Pacers pick is Jacobe Walter. He was a pretty highly regarded guy coming into college, coming out of high school. He's sort of branded as a movement 3-point shooter. He's only shot 34% from deep this season. But I was listening yesterday to our pal Rafael Barlow on Locked On NBA Big Board, and he was kind of comparing Jacobe Walter's season at Baylor similarly to Keyonte George's season at Baylor last year, where, maybe the role he was in didn't quite suit his talents, and you're probably going to see a better version of him in the pros than you would in college. And, Rafael Barlow was extremely right on that one with Keyonte George last year. Where are you at with Jacobe Walter as a potential guy? Maybe as sort of you draft him as your long-term Gary Trent Jr. replacement type. Where are you at there?
I think that it's probably a good point. Like, Keyonte George and Jacobe Walter are different players in the sense that George is a much better playmaker, and Walter, in theory, is a much better jump shooter. But Baylor plays in the Big 12, which is by far the best conference in college basketball and extremely, extremely physical. It can be very hard for freshmen to adapt. And there's such thing as a freshman wall, really, where as the season goes on and you're not used to playing so many games against physical teams, you slow down. So Jacobe Walter in the non-conference portion of the season, that would be November and December, he went 34 of 80 from three. And that's, and it's in the high 30s. Maybe it's probably in the high 40s, actually. Well above 40. In the conference portion of the schedule, so that's January, February, March, he went 34 of 117. So 34 makes on 80 and 34 and 117. That's 29.1%. So that percentage has really gone down in large part because of the physicality of Big 12 basketball. Watching him in the non-conference portion of the schedule, and that does count for something. He is one of the best floor spacers in this draft. He's an electric scorer. He can score off of the bounce, but he's best off the catch and coming off of screens. I don't think there's a better three-point shooter in college outside of Kentucky's Reed Shepherd in terms of projectability moving forward. And you kind of just have to deal with the percentages like Keyonte George. He's going to become a lot more efficient in the NBA with more space, less physical demands, and more practice and more strength on his own frame. I wouldn't be concerned about the percentage. If you're looking for a sharpshooter in that, lottery range, later lottery range, Jacobe Walter would probably be my selection.
Interesting. We are going to continue on here, Matthew, and get into some rapid fire through some other guys who very much fall under the ifs and buts category. We'll talk about Ryan Dunn. We'll talk about Zach Edey, everyone's favorite large Canadian man, and all that coming up in just 1 second to round out the show. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is not just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion with a B professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours of posting a job. That is pretty sweet. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing all sorts of hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. It takes a lot of time to hire the right people. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring to make it easier. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Rounding out the show here with Matthew Winick, the senior NCAA writer over at The Score. I'm used to having Joe Wolfond on the show with the NBA.
I do both, so we're good.
Yeah, perfect. Well, then this is why you're a fantastic person having the show. Ball is the thing. So, Matthew, let's get into some rapid fire guys who very much fall under the category of this guy does this thing extremely well, but there's this extremely enormous caveat that kind of diminishes his value. I want to begin with Ryan Dunn from Virginia. Everything you read about this guy is a ridiculous defensive prospect, maybe the best defensive prospect in recent memory. I believe Sam Vecini said he's like a better defender now than Herb Jones was coming out of school in his mock today. That's very high praise. The problem is he shoots 20% on threes and down the stretch of the season just kind of stopped taking them. There is some stuff he does on offense, cutting, offensive rebounding, stuff like that. But the shooting seems to be like a real potential thing that could undo Ryan Dunn's NBA potential. What's the pitch for you on Ryan Dunn? Is he someone you would be interested in taking if that Pacers pick, or even with that sort of Pistons pick at 31 or 32, if he's there? Or is the shooting enough of a red flag for you to say no, can't do it in today's NBA?
I definitely wouldn't consider it with the Pacers pick. Maybe with the Pistons pick in the second round. Like we said, free throws, 53% on free throws. He's not a
great Bob.
Complete non-shooter. I hate to. I know Raptors fans aren't the biggest Jalen McDaniels fans in the world right now. That's kind of the comp for me. Jalen McDaniels is 6'9", Ryan Dunn 6'8", around similar body types, super long. Ryan Dunn plays for a great defensive system, so those defensive numbers are there. But offensively, you're like, oh well, maybe he can hit a couple of shots, so we can leave him on the floor for his defense. And then he just can't hit a couple of shots. Maybe one day crazier things have happened, and that's why I think maybe very early in the second round with the Pistons pick, it's just worth the flyer. Like, throw him to the wind. Maybe that three-point shooter sticks, and then you have an elite defender. But if you can't contribute at all offensively on an NBA floor, especially if you have any other spot in your lineup reserved for a non-shooter, which the Raptors do, perhaps in multiple positions, it's going to be a really tough fit.
It's a bummer because his wing defense is so badly needed on this team. But yeah, I don't think you can draft a guy with that far to go. There's one thing to say, oh, well, this guy can learn how to shoot. Guys with this little in terms of projectable stuff, three-point shooting wise, very rarely figure it out. It's a harder thing to do than it's just just teach him to shoot and he's fine. Like, if everyone could just learn to shoot, then everyone would be amazing. And that's just not the reality, unfortunately. I want to ask you about Zach Edey. Probably doesn't. He's kind of in the Clingan range where it's like, okay, like do they need a hulking big man like this? I think Edey obviously has flashed a little bit more in terms of offensive skill than Clingan has as a college player, 2-time defending college player of the year. He's bloody awesome at Purdue. Thoughts on Edey? Maybe he's a guy they take with that Pistons pick if he's there. It seems like he might actually go in the first round, so maybe that rules him out for the Raptors because I don't see them using their Pacers pick on him. But what's your read on Edey and his sort of NBA projectability?
His NBA projectability is he's shown that on a court where basketball is played, he can be unbelievably good at doing that sport. Obviously, there are major flaws in his game. He is not fast. He cannot run the floor super well, and he cannot defend anything other than a deep drop coverage. And even still, he has his flaws there. He's not overly long despite his elite size. But in the same way that, Boban Marjanovic in the mid-2010s, late 2010s, was a guy that you could put in for 12, 15 minutes and just be unbelievably efficient and effective from two-point range. That's what Zach Edey can do. Your defense is going to have to play a certain way when he's on the floor, but that doesn't necessarily mean that a drop coverage-based team has to pick him because you're not going to play him 30 minutes a game. If you have 12 to 15 minutes allocated for someone who's going to provide elite offense and elite size at the rim defensively, that's got to be worth something. I don't think it's worth a first-round pick, but it's worth something, and it's worth a pick somewhere.
Interesting stuff. We'll see about Edey. Clearly, you hope Purdue doesn't do the thing where they get waxed in the first round by, I guess it'd be a 16 seed, not a 15 this year. That would be nice. It'd be nice to see Edey take a nice deep run here. Let's go to the Colorado guys. Two guys who I think, one's being projected much higher than the other. They play in a first 4 game tomorrow. For those interested in the prospect side of things, you're rooting for Colorado to win against Boise State tomorrow. You have Cody Williams, who's projected in the lottery right now. I believe Sam Vecini has him going 7th with the Raptors pick to the Spurs in his latest mock. Brother of Jalen Williams on the good Jalen Williams on the Thunder, of course. And he's a bit bigger. He's 6'8". He's got that wing profile that this Raptors team really needs. There are questions about him as a sort of shot creator, questions about him as a rebounder. He's got horrible rebounding metrics in college. And then Tristan da Silva is projected to go later on, maybe with that Pistons pick range and the early second round, late first round type thing. But he seems to be more sort of like a high floor guy who's been around, who kind of does a little bit of everything. I kind of love Tristan da Silva as someone who loves adults who just like know how to play basketball. He's probably going to be one of my dudes here as we progress forward in the draft process. But Cody Williams, Tristan da Silva, who would you prefer as sort of a fit on the Raptors? And, what's your sort of read on both of them as prospects here and sort of what you're watching for in the tournament from each of them?
Yeah, Williams, I think, probably would be a bit of a spotty fit, especially early in his career. He definitely has the length and he has the projectability as someone who could be a great 3-and-D wing. But because he's not a playmaker and because he's not a great shooter yet, I don't really see how he blends in that lineup right now. We talked about Stephon Castle. Although both of their three-pointers are blossoming, Castle has that playmaking skill to fall back on that Cody Williams, which you'd think, Jalen Williams is an awesome playmaker. He's basically a pseudo point guard. That is not something that they share in their games. So I would say if you're projecting Cody Williams as someone who has the same playmaking chops as Jalen, don't. I think you'd probably still pick him in the top 10 in this draft just because of the high school pedigree and because of the length. But he's definitely far from a finished product. Tristan da Silva, throw personality out of the ring because they could be more different, but he reminds me of Kyle Kuzma in his game in the way that he's 6'8", 6'9", small forward, power forward, not going to play a ton of center, great shooter, decent with the ball in his hands, can get to the basket pretty well for someone at 6'9", 220. A hybrid tweener forward who I think, that was once a bad word in NBA scouting pools. I think right now that's a great thing. Someone who can play multiple positions, knock down threes, and put the ball on the floor. Sounds like a great bet to me. And you're not looking at the same range draft wise for him. So I don't see why he couldn't be a good fit, especially if he drops down to the 31st pick.
Yeah, I'm going to be fully on the Da Silva bandwagon. I really hope Colorado wins this game because I want to see them play a little bit deeper into the tournament. Cody Williams, worth noting, he's shot 42% from three. You might go, ooh, 42%. It's like super low volume. His last 5 games, 0 for 1, 0 for 1, 0 for 1, 0 for 1, 0 for 1. Kind of gives you a picture of the volume you're getting from Cody Williams from deep. One last guy I want to talk to you about. And it is a fascinating player. He plays for Grand Canyon, Tyion Grant-Foster. Watch this dude's highlights. He is like an absolutely electric scorer. Kind of bounced around, I believe, at Kansas for a bit at a couple of different schools. Had 2 years off due to cardiac troubles. He had 2 cardiac arrests, if I'm not mistaken, and now is back. He's a 24-year-old. He's been around a long time, and he seems like he might be in line if Grand Canyon can do the sort of 12 seed upset thing to be the type of guy who boosts his draft stock to get into the draft conversation this year despite his age, because he's just that electric of a scorer. Seems like a pretty awesome story one way or another to be in the spot he's in, considering what he's gone through medically over the last couple seasons. But again, sort of an extreme caveat guy where look at all the scoring he does, but he's 24 and has had 2 cardiac arrests. Where are you at with Tyion Grant-Foster? Are you excited to watch this dude in the tournament?
Yeah, so he was the junior college player of the year before going to Kansas, where he struggled with efficiency. DePaul was great for the game that he played before the cardiac arrest. Year off, Grand Canyon. Look, Grand Canyon's going to play a St. Mary's team in the first round here, and St. Mary's does not play an NBA style of defense. They play a deep drop. They have giant dudes that aren't athletic really a ton, and they're going to force him to take a bunch of difficult shots that he has not really been taking all season. And I'm worried. I'm a little bit worried for him because he's not going to be out in the open court. There's not going to be any transition game. He's going to be bogged down in the half court, and I wonder how he succeeds. I hope that he shows out, scores 30 points, they advance to the next round, and he's able to boost his draft stock. But the problem with Tyion Grant-Foster is he isn't an outstanding shooter. Physically 6'7", great bounce, great in transition, unbelievable at drawing fouls. He's one of the best free throw merchants, I guess you can say that word, in college basketball. And those are skills that are definitely transferable. Defensively, he's a beast. He can be a beast in the NBA. Just because he's 24 doesn't mean he can't move anymore. I'm 24, so I can tell you for a fact that we can still move. Don't discount us.
Don't rub it in to the over 30 guy who can barely move. Not enjoying that at all.
But and look, I think that what would really help him is a big tournament, and I'm worried about the matchup. But he's definitely electric, and I think that in an NBA system, you can plug and play him. We look at someone like, not a perfect comp, but Najee Marshall is someone who had a long career at Xavier, and he's someone who sort of was physically ready for the NBA right away. And it proved that he was ready for the NBA right away. He played a big role on some Pelicans teams. And I think that Tyion Grant-Foster can play a similar role. But if you're projecting anything more than a role player, probably not, given his development and where he is on his career path, still someone definitely to watch out for, and could make a huge name for himself in March.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about him because I do think with that Pistons pick, he's an interesting guy, because the Raptors are clearly trying to like hit the go button with Scotty Barnes, put a team around him that's ready. And if you can get someone in the second round who can just like jump in and play for you, that is a massive thing, especially when you're just looking for guys to sort of fill out your depth chart and roster. And with the 32nd pick, like you're sort of throwing darts anyway. Get a guy who's a little more established, a little more ready physically, and has some scoring pop to his game. I think that could be a pretty interesting piece for the Raptors to potentially look at. Hopefully, Grand Canyon can pull off the upset and over St. Mary's and continue this on. Also, very cool purple jerseys for Grand Canyon. That's always good to have in the tournament. Cool. We'll leave it there, Matthew. This was amazing. Thank you so much for lending your talents to the show. I will absolutely be calling on you again before the draft to hop on if you're at all interested in talking to my yammering ass again. Do you have anything you want to promote for the good people out there?
No, just keep it locked on my Twitter. That's linked there below. And on the Score app, tons of March Madness content is coming out shortly and currently.
Excellent. Yeah, at Matthew Winick, W-I-N-I-C-K. Wow, I can't read letters. But yeah, check out all Matthew's great work over at The Score. Of course, we got lots of pals over at The Score who do great work. Joey Cash, Joe Wolfond, et cetera, et cetera. Go and support what they're doing there. We will leave you there. Thank you so much. We'll come back tomorrow on Wednesday with another episode of Locked On Raptors. In the meantime, thanks for hanging. Support the show. Subscribe, follow, rate, review, et cetera, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. And we'll talk to you Wednesday. Bye-bye.